In 1925, Ma Rainey was arrested for hosting a lesbian party in her house. In 1969, the Stonewall Riots were started by a raid of the Stonewall Inn. In 1993, protesters in Kansas burned copies of 80 on My Mind. Now, there's a well-known trans superhero, two trans M&Ms, Chicago's mayor is a black lesbian, SpongeBob has finally been confirmed as gay. As of 2015, gay marriage is legal in all 50 states, and as of this year, discrimination against LGBTQ people in the workplace is technically illegal. That's progress, that's good, but there's still work to be done, especially in the places we've got backwards. Regardless of direction, most movement is due to representation of the queer community, primarily in the media. Representation is a description or portrayal of someone or something in a particular way or as a being of a certain nature. So good representation progresses us towards LGBTQ people getting basic human rights and decency from our government and society, while bad rep keeps us standing still or moves us in the opposite direction of equality. But what is good or bad representation? After all, definitions can only explain so much. Now it's probably a good time for me to mention that if you hear me say any TV show, book, or movie, there's going to be spoilers for it. For every example of positive, accurate queer representation, there's 100 more examples of the exact opposite. In the film, it comes in two main forms, queerbaiting and the bury the queers tactic. Queerbaiting, by its definition, is a marketing technique for fiction and entertainment in which creators hint at but they do not actually depict same-sex romance or other LGBTQ representation. This usually happens by purposefully exploiting or making fun of queer romance, lifestyle, or culture, or by acknowledging that something gives off really queer vibes, but then not making it canonly queer. This brings me to my inspiration for this talk, Supergirl. I'm obsessed with the show, and I could go on a rant about it for hours, the good and the bad, but I'm particularly obsessed with Supercore. Supercore is a ship name given to Kara Danvers and Lena Luthor. Lena once looked sadly out a window, holding a glass of wine, looking at a framed photo of her and Kara together, while Kara sat on her couch, looking at the same photo, all while sad breakup music played in the background. Kara has saved Lena numerous times and cares about her more than any other character on the show, and Lena has always looked up to Kara and Supergirl, or towards them in support, more than any other character on the show. Had one of them been a man, they'd have been dating by the end of the second season. But when Supergirl was first brought up by the audience, the producer shot it down, saying that they were just friends. I don't think when people receive advice about someone they're just friends with, their friendship gets compared to their sister's homosexual romance. Not making Supercore canon would have been a different, maybe not as big of an issue, had they stopped playing to the romance. But Kara and Lena grew closer and closer and closer. The producers acknowledged that the audience had seen the chemistry, had seen the romance, called them out for queerbaiting, and then changed nothing, continuing to profit from the people shipping them in the hope that maybe one day they'll change their minds. Time passed. Season 5 rolled around, and we were told Supergirl would be given more screen time, except Kara and Lena barely spoke to each other all season because they were in what seemed to be an inescapable feud. That's queerbaiting, plain and simple. Not to mention this shot. Two besties sitting on a couch, 5 feet apart because they're not gay. Oh, wait. Seriously, 5 feet apart? Seems suspicious. But like I said, queerbaiting isn't the only problem. Bury the gays has been used for decades, but has recently evolved into bury the queers now that homosexuals aren't the only non-cis heteronormative characters being portrayed in the media. The bury the queers tactic is in place when the queer characters have an unnecessarily negative ending, whether they break up with their lover, they die, their lover dies, they lose their job, they get arrested, or something else horrible. And because they're the only or one of the few queers on the show, it sends the message to queer people that one, there's not a lot of people like you out there in the world, which is untrue, and two, if you accept yourself, if you embrace your queerness, if you're an LGBTQ person, you're gonna have a horrible life with a terrible ending. Where can we see this tactic play out? Dynasty, another CW show. On the show, the only two queers are two cisgender homosexual men, one of whom is white. They got married, yay! But they were hardly married before one of them moved away, and they ended up getting a divorce only a few episodes into that season. They're both main characters, and their relationship was an important plot line, yet there was close to no sexual activities going on. Now you might be thinking, well, this show's probably meant for younger audiences, right? No, it's not. I can recall countless times two cisheads or non-queer people were making out in only their underwear. In fact, that's how we were introduced to two main characters in the first episode. There's even a part where two half-cousins date, sleep with each other, and then almost get married. With the two gay guys, the sexiest thing I can remember is when they made out in a church. Now, there are a lot of other examples of queerbaiting, burying the queers, and other forms of queer exploitation in the movies and TV, but I don't have time to go through all of them, so I'll just list a few. The Lion King, Mulan, Sherlock, Killing Eve, Once Upon a Time, Pitch Perfect, Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, The Rise of Skywalker, Legacies, and Stranger Things. There's a thing happening in the book industry where people seem to be thinking, that good representation is being a bigot in almost every way possible in a culturally resetting, generation-defining hit series, not including any queer people, and then as soon as you want or need to fulfill a diversity quota, making a character gay without any solid foundation for it at all, and then going on Twitter and being blatantly transphobic. I'm looking at you, J.K. Rowling. Her plots are so intricately woven that you can see exactly what kind of character everyone in the Harry Potter series is. But Dumbledore? As much as I love finally seeing a main character in a big book franchise be gay, the only clue that he's gay is that he's really good friends with Grindelwald. Her intent is flawed, but even if it wasn't, how it comes across is flawed too. Obviously, I'm not going to forget about one of the biggest forms of media out there, social media. Social media is how so much queer culture has grown so rapidly because it provides a way for our community to connect anonymously so that we can experience things as if we were out without actually being out. We can share stories and experiences instantaneously. We can get tips on how to come out safely. We have access to transition videos and tips. We have access to sources that tell us our rights. And we have a further reach to awareness of events of injustice. But there's also a lot of anti-LGBTQ hate, apps, practices, websites that work against us all over the internet. For example, TikTok. There are a lot of problems with this app, including shadow banning. Shadow banning is just regular banning, but without notifications or explanations as to why the ban is occurring. Back in June, TikTok shadow banned virtual pride hashtags and videos, and then decided to host their own little virtual pride event towards the end of June. And then they gave the link to the call to a known homophobe, told them not to share the link, and then when they inevitably shared it, they didn't take the video down. So instead of a virtual celebration of pride, queer creators got to see the word kill written over and over again on their screens, as well as see and hear racial slurs. TikTok could have prevented this, but they didn't. It was a sound that fetishizes queer women that has not been muted, yet when we try to speak up about human rights issues and harassment, our videos are taken down. And this is all in the name of violating community guidelines. What community? TikTok, the Westboro Baptist Church? Then, in late July, a trend surfaced where a bunch of straight men made fun of queer men on the app by acting gay, and then straight girls fetishized them acting gay, which was all really harmful and frankly disgusting. Over and over again, stuff like this happens and TikTok doesn't care. The news is yet another problem. When Tony McDade, a trans man, and Brayla Stone, a trans woman, were murdered, there was almost no media coverage at all. In the 80s, with the AIDS epidemic going on, the queer community was painted as the as the people to blame for this killer disease, when in fact they were the majority of the victims. The media coverage of the Stonewall riots was also really homophobic, which shaped people's views in the queer community, and also what got put into the history books, which was nothing. That's right, the classroom is also queerphobic. Schools don't teach queer sex ed, talk about important LGBTQ figures. When they do, they don't mention the fact that they're queer. And they don't talk about important LGBTQ events in any country or time period. In my freshman year, when we were learning about the Italian Renaissance, I don't remember anything specifically talking about the large queer community that had a huge influence on that time period, including people like Donatello, Michelangelo, and Da Vinci, who was arrested for gay sex twice before the age of 24. I definitely don't remember learning about how Cleopatra was probably a lesbian, Abe Lincoln, Anne Frank, Alexander Hamilton, and James Buchanan were all gay, or how almost every man in ancient Thebes was either bi or pansexual. And I definitely didn't learn about Marsha P. Johnson, Sappho, Stormy DeLaveray, Renee Richards, Salvador Novo, Alice Walker, or Sylvia Rivera, all important queer figures. Now it's the music industry's turn. Closeting is a huge thing in the music industry. Lance Bass said he felt pressured to not come out so that he wouldn't mess up NSYNC's success. Hayley Kiyoko was told to tone down her sexuality. Ollie Alexander was told to closet himself as to protect his band. And Lloyd Daniels, an X Factor contestant from 2009, wasn't allowed to come out while on the show. Management and label also give people beards or fake partners to hide their sexuality. Many artists have been forced to partake in these relationship stunts, including Sam Smith, Ricky Martin, Freddie Mercury, and Elton John, who had to marry his beard for 4 years. Lance Bass even said he knows tons of queer celebrities who still aren't out yet, and I can think of 6 off the top of my head. Now, hopefully you're beginning to feel how hard it is to be an LGBTQ person, but honestly, however bad you think it is so much worse for queer people of color. They're marginalized because of their race and their sexual and or gender identities. Hate groups come after them twice as hard, and they also have twice as many hate groups to look out for. That's just from the outside. From the inside, they have to deal with racist members of the LGBTQ community and queerphobic people of color. They're ostracized in both communities that should be making them feel like family just because of another identity they can't help either. In America, trans black women have done a lot for both the black and queer communities, that they're the most likely to be murdered and the most likely to be overlooked. A lot of people have raised their fists and supported the Black Lives Matter movement, but still ignore and reject trans black people just because they don't seem to understand intersectionality. If you don't support trans black lives, you don't support any black lives. There's a YouTuber who is a queer person of color who has talked about how he can't even use some dating apps like Grindr or Tinder because men will call him slurs and fetishize him daily. Black youth are kicked out of their homes for being LGBTQ, even though between the threats of both complete strangers and cops, it's extremely dangerous to be a black homeless youth in America. In 2018, 4 out of 5 transphobic homicides were of trans people of color. Here are some statistics from 2017 that were given by GLAAD, or the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. In the US alone, 26 transgender people were murdered. 25 of them were trans women or were born male but feminine representing. 24 of them were people of color. 21 black people, 2 Latinx people, and 1 Native American person. And at least 22 of the initial reports of their murders, they were misgendered. 15 of them were killed in states that had either attempted or successfully passed anti-transgender legislation that year. When this report was released, 12 of the murders were still unsolved. That was in 2017, only 3 years ago. That was only reported murders. That was only murders, not beatings. That was only of trans people. Now you know some of what's happening, where it's happening, how it's happening, but why? Why do queer people care so much about representation? Well, simply put, it's because of the bigotry and oppression faced by us every single day and how wanting to end that receives so much backlash. There are quite a few arguments against queer people in the media. Most of it's blatant homophobia, while the other excuses are, well, excuses. You may say, the cis-hets need someone to relate to. Well, to that I say, ugh! Seriously, you have people to relate to. You have people that you can connect with. And second of all, that's like saying, well, I'm sorry, we can't have any other people of color in this show. We need characters for the white people to relate to. It's the same vibe. It's hateful, it's bigoted, and it's wrong. You may say that we're shoving it in your face. Well, have you considered this? Maybe cis-hets have been the ones shoving their binary gender norms and cis-heteronormativity in the face of queer people for centuries. When we walk down the streets, we see advertising for only straight couples. When we're at family gatherings, we're always hit with the, oh, do you have an insert opposite gender friend yet? Whenever we don't conform to cis-het standards of the norm, we're looked down upon. We're not shoving anything in your face, we're just being something you don't want to see, ourselves. And just because you don't want to see it doesn't mean it can't happen. Nobody wanted the Cats movie, at least not like that, and yet. Here's an analogy. You watch a movie, but you stop watching it before the end so that it has the ending you like. Every time you watch it, you end at the same spot. But that's not what actually happens because there's more to the movie. So when you finally, forced or not, watch the rest of the movie, you feel like the ending is wrong or a lie, but it's not. Just because you're not used to it doesn't mean the ending is bad. It's always been there, you've just always ignored it. Just because you refuse to accept or even acknowledge our existence doesn't mean it hasn't always been there, because it has. Now, you have control over when to end a movie, I don't care, but you cannot control queer people or our existence, especially by censoring how much people see of us. You may be saying, oh, well, my kids can't see that. Do you want my kids to see that? Yes, actually, I do want your kids to see it, because from a very early age, LGBTQ people know that we're different. We may not know the difference between gay and straight or that you can be anything other than cisgender, but we still know that something about us is different. We can feel it. They say, be unique, be different, but we know that whatever way we are different, they're not going to think it's who we truly are, that it's too different, too unique. We know. So showing kids queer people in media won't make your kids gay, because that's not how it works, but it might help queer kids realize that they're queer sooner, which will ease their inner conflict. If they see themselves on the screen, maybe they'll know they're not freaks. Maybe they'll be inspired to come out if they see other people like them living good lives. Maybe they'll be inspired to help others come out, regardless if they're out themselves or not. Maybe they'll be inspired to inspire others too by also pursuing a career on the screen or in another form of media. Maybe if they see people like them, if they see that it's okay to be themselves, then they'll be inspired to love themselves for once in their lives. So maybe, just maybe, I want good, proper queer representation so that I can inspire kids to not want to kill themselves. Because that's how serious this is. And is it so wrong? Is it so wrong to want to make kids happy enough to not want to die? No, not all queer kids kill themselves, but a lot of us do, or try to. In fact, in America, 40% of trans teens commit suicide every year. And no, not all kids are queer, but because there's so much more than being heteromantic, heterosexual, and cisgender, there are a lot more queer people than you think. And saying that not all kids are queer is as naive as saying all lives matter, because the response is the same, duh. But we're not talking about the majority. They've been talked about long enough. We're talking about the minority. Cisheads need to know that their queer peers aren't freaks or scary or wrong or easy targets. Acceptance starts from a young age, as does rejection. Refuse to give your kid peanut butter and they'll grow up allergic to it. Happened to me with cats. Likewise, if you raise your kids homophobic, they might end up hating themselves, their best friends, their significant others, their family members, co-workers, bosses, all important people in their lives. If you don't raise your kids as homophobic, but you don't raise them as allies either, then the same thing happens. Silence is violence. We need to change what people see in the media for all ages, so that in a world run by the media, it's harder for internalized homophobia to set in, and easier for cis heteronormativity to go bye-bye. So what if giving LGBTQ people proper, accurate representation will receive backlash? Are your homophobic viewers that much more important than your queer ones and their allies? Is hate something you prioritize? Because we have the power. Love has the power. So don't be afraid to go start watching a show about a trans Native American woman, or a gender fluid bisexual Muslim, or a pansexual immigrant from Cameroon. And don't be afraid to be the first person to start writing those shows either. Because if the representation is done correctly, then the show will have people to defend it from those who will try to cancel it for inclusivity. And if you can't do the representation right, then learn. Ask people who can. Listen to people who can do it right. Educate yourself. And if all else fails, hire people of those identities to write accurate representations of themselves. Please, please go support queer people in the media so that producers will see it's okay to make minorities not as oppressed. We won't stop until they listen to us. We won't stop until we're free. We won't. Because we're here, we're queer, and we're not going anywhere.